The mansion's marble foyer was flooding, and the woman who owned 3 companies, 2 private jets, and a fortune worth $900 million stood in the middle of it in her silk robe, utterly powerless to stop the water rising around her ankles. Her name was Eleanor Voss, and for the first time in 15 years, money could not solve her problem fast enough. If you believe in second chances, in kindness that shows up when you least expect it, hit that like button right now, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel, because stories like this one are proof that the world still has good people in it. It was a Tuesday morning in early spring when the pipe burst beneath Eleanor's estate on the hill overlooking the city. She had built her empire from nothing, clawing her way up from a cramped apartment with a broken heater to boardrooms where men twice her age called her ma'am out of fear, not respect. She had learned, over 3 brutal decades, that vulnerability was a weakness the world would exploit the moment it saw a crack. So when the emergency plumbing company arrived, took one look at her address, her car collection in the driveway, and the chandelier visible through the window, they handed her a quote that made even her blink, $80,000. Full repiping, they said. Structural risk. Insurance complications. Eleanor was tired, she was frustrated, and some small, exhausted part of her almost just said yes, because saying yes was easier than fighting when you were this depleted. But something in her, the same stubborn instinct that had once negotiated a merger with 3 hours of sleep and a fever of 102, told her to wait. She sent the men away and sat on her front steps, staring at the water still seeping from beneath her front door, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, helpless. 3 miles away, in a rented duplex with peeling paint and a leaky faucet of its own, a man named Daniel Reyes was making breakfast for his 7-year-old daughter, Mia, before her school bus came. Daniel was 34, a former Navy mechanic turned freelance handyman, and a widower for the past 2 years since a car accident took his wife on a rainy November night. He didn't talk about it much. He didn't have time to. Between fixing leaky pipes for elderly neighbors, patching roofs for people who couldn't afford contractors, and being both mother and father to a little girl who still sometimes cried for a woman she was forgetting the sound of, Daniel had learned to keep moving. Grief, he'd found, was easier to carry when your hands were busy. He was loading his toolbox into his beat-up pickup truck when his phone buzzed. It was his neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, asking if he could come look at a burst pipe up on Hillcrest Drive, the fancy street none of them ever had a reason to visit. Her cousin cleaned houses up there and had mentioned a rich lady was about to get robbed blind by a company quoting 80 grand for what sounded, from the description, like a simple busted joint. Daniel almost said no. He had 3 jobs already lined up. But something about the unfairness of it, a stranger about to lose $80,000 for what his gut told him was maybe a $200 fix, needled at him the way it always did when he saw someone being taken advantage of. He told Mrs. Alvarez he'd swing by on his lunch break. When Daniel pulled his rusted truck into Eleanor Voss's circular driveway, past the fountain and the topiary shaped like swans, he felt distinctly out of place. Eleanor, still in her robe, hair pulled back in frustration, watched a stranger in a paint-stained flannel shirt climb out of a truck that looked older than her youngest employee. She almost sent him away. She had built walls so high that letting an unknown man into her flooding home felt like one indignity too many in a morning already full of them. But Mrs. Alvarez's cousin, the housekeeper, vouched for him, and Eleanor, standing ankle-deep in her own ruined foyer, decided she had nothing left to lose. Daniel didn't say much at first. He knelt by the water, traced it back to its source along the baseboard, and asked to see the basement access. Eleanor led him down, feeling strange to be following a stranger through her own home instead of the other way around. Down in the crawlspace, flashlight in his teeth, Daniel found it within 20 minutes, a single corroded joint in an old copper pipe easily replaced, no structural damage, no need to repipe anything. It was, in the world of plumbing emergencies, almost embarrassingly minor. He explained it to her plainly, without the jargon the other company had used to intimidate her, without the smugness some men adopted when correcting a woman who clearly knew nothing about pipes. He simply said the truth, this is a small problem, and I can fix it in about an hour." Eleanor stood there for a long moment, absorbing not the news about the pipe, but something else entirely, the strange, disorienting experience of a man asking for nothing but honesty in return for his time. She asked him, almost suspiciously, what he'd charge. Daniel shrugged and said $40 would cover the part. He didn't ask about a labor fee. He said he was already out this way for another job. While he worked, Eleanor found herself lingering nearby, not out of suspicion anymore, but curiosity. She asked why he did this kind of work when he clearly could charge more, could probably start his own company, undercut everyone in the city and still make a fortune. Daniel laughed, a tired but genuine sound, and told her the truth. Overhead, advertising, the paperwork of running a real company, none of that fit into a life where he was also trying to be there for every school pickup, every fever at 2 a.m., every night his daughter needed him to check under the bed for monsters that weren't there. He said it simply, without self-pity, the way people speak about things they've made peace with even when peace cost them nearly everything. Something about his voice cracked something loose in Eleanor. She thought about her own life, the 15-hour days, the empty dining room table in a house with 11 rooms, the fact that she couldn't remember the last time someone had done something for her without wanting something bigger in return. She had spent so many years building walls to keep predators out that she'd also kept out anyone gentle enough to matter. Watching this stranger fix her pipe for the cost of a takeout dinner, refusing to inflate his worth just because he could, she felt something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time, humbled. When Daniel finished, wiping his hands on a rag, Eleanor tried to pay him more. She offered $500, then $1,000, watching his face for the greed she was used to seeing in everyone who got close to her money. It never came. Daniel gently refused, saying $40 was the job, and taking more would feel like taking advantage of someone who was upset and vulnerable, and that wasn't who he was. He packed his tools, thanked her for the coffee she'd offered him halfway through the job, and mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that he needed to get going. His daughter's school called sometimes when she got anxious, and he liked to keep his phone close. That single detail, a father worried about his little girl in the middle of a stranger's plumbing emergency, stayed with Eleanor long after his truck pulled out of her driveway. Over the following weeks, Eleanor found herself unable to let it go. She had people for everything, assistants, researchers, a small army of professionals who could find anyone, anything. She used none of them for herself in years, but this time she asked her assistant, quietly, to find out more about the man from Hillcrest Drive. What she learned humbled her further. Daniel had spent the last 2 years not just raising his daughter alone, but quietly repairing homes for elderly neighbors on fixed incomes, sometimes for free, always refusing to inflate prices even when people offered to pay more. He'd been offered supervisor positions at 2 different companies and turned them both down because the hours would take him away from Mia's bedtime. Eleanor didn't return to being the same woman who'd stood in that flooded foyer, resigned to being fleeced because she was too tired to fight. Instead, she did something that surprised even her longtime employees. She quietly funded a small business grant, anonymous at first, meant specifically for tradespeople, plumbers, electricians, mechanics, who wanted to build honest companies without sacrificing time with their families. She structured it so single parents received priority consideration, remembering the exhaustion and love she'd seen on Daniel's face that day. When the grant letter arrived at Daniel's duplex months later, he assumed it was a mistake. He called the number twice to confirm it wasn't a scam. It wasn't. The letter explained he'd receive enough funding to start his own company, hire 2 employees, and, crucially, build a schedule flexible enough that he'd never miss another school pickup or bedtime again. There was no name attached, only a short note that read, "Because honesty deserves to be rewarded, not exploited." $40 changed more than a pipe. Daniel wouldn't learn the identity of his benefactor for almost a year, not until Eleanor, in a rare moment of vulnerability during a charity gala she'd organized for working-class families, spotted him across the room, invited, unknowingly, as one of the grant's success stories. When their eyes met, she didn't need to say much. She simply told him that his honesty had reminded her what her own money was supposed to be for in the first place, and that Mia, now attending a school with an aftercare program that let Daniel breathe a little easier, deserved a father who didn't have to choose between providing and being present. If this story moved you even a little, if it reminded you that kindness still exists in a world that often feels cold and transactional, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs a reminder today. And before you go, do one small thing for me. Comment the word honesty below if you believe small acts of integrity can change someone's entire life, because somewhere out there, someone like Daniel is fixing a stranger's problem for far less than they deserve, simply because it's the right thing to do. Eleanor Voss went on to fund dozens more grants for tradespeople across the country, but she often said that none of it would have happened without one flooded foyer, one honest man, and a $40 fix that reminded a billionaire what money could never buy.